The NFL playoffs are approaching very quickly, and with the Chargers currently sitting outside of the playoffs and entering Week 13, I want to go through some of the games that are very important for the Chargers' success into making the playoffs. And this should likely be a series we're going to be going through each week, and we're going to be talking about the current playoffs and standings. We're going to be talking about every single game of the week and who you should be rooting for, and just be talking about what the Chargers need to be prepared for through the remainder of the season. So, without further ado, let's go and get right into those things. Now, like I said, we're entering Week 13 at the current moment, and the Chargers sit at 6-5 at the 9th seed in the AFC. Now, we're going to be going through only the AFC because obviously, playoffs-wise, the NFC doesn't matter. Although the Chargers may be facing some teams in the NFC, which could lead to certain things based on, certain wins now versus later could lead to that team being in a position where they're fighting to win or they're resting some players. But we're going to be talking about the AFC playoffs by themselves right now. So first, let's talk about the playoff standings. Number one seed in the entire AFC is the Kansas City Chiefs at 9-2, and it's likely that they're going to be staying in that spot relatively, at least in the top four, because after the loss from the Chargers a couple weeks back, it would take practically a miracle for the Chargers to be able to take that number one seed in the division from the Chiefs in the AFC West. It's very unlikely to happen. So the Chiefs are at least going to be in the top four. So there's not much that can really occur there. Currently, the number two seed in the AFC is the Miami Dolphins at an 8-3 record, just barely beating out the Buffalo Bills for that top seed in their division. The third seed is the Tennessee Titans with a 7-4 record. Honestly, I think they've been playing well above a lot of people's expectations, especially after losing A.J. Brown in the trade earlier in the year. And in the fourth seed, the final top seed is going to be the Baltimore Ravens at a 7-4 record at fourth place in the AFC. Now, for the wild card spots, it is getting really tight. And as a whole, there's a lot of important games you should be looking out for, but we're only going to be talking about this week. The fifth seed, we have the Buffalo Bills, again, just barely being beat out by the Miami Dolphins. At this current moment, the Bills are 8-3, and they're second in the AFC East. Next up, at the sixth seed, we have the Bengals, who are 7-4, and the seventh seed is the New York Jets at 7-4. Now, like I mentioned, the Chargers are 6-5. They're currently the 9th seed with the Patriots as the 8th seed at 6-5 as well. So the Chargers are one game back from being in that playoff spot, in the wildcard spot. And, it's likely that if the Chargers win out, they're guaranteed a spot into the playoffs. But there's a lot of things that you still got to root for. It's not 100% in the Chargers' hand at this very moment. They could win out and, technically speaking, still not make the playoffs based on certain things occurring throughout the rest of the year. So you also have the 10th seed, which is one spot right behind the Chargers, obviously, is the Colts, who are at 4-7-1, likely not going to be in the race. So the key factors they're going to be looking at here is going to be the Chargers, the Patriots, the Jets, and the Bengals. Those are the main primary people you're going to be looking at long-term for the playoffs, with the likely fact that the final spot in the wild card being the Bills is practically a lock. It's either going to be them or the Bengals in the wild card spot, but it's likely they're going to be in the wild card nonetheless. So you have four teams in the AFC that you're primarily looking out for, but there is a little bit more you want to be betting on. Maybe not betting, but hoping for. So let's move on to the actual games in Week 13, who to be rooting for, what the games are, and why you should be rooting for teams if it's not certain obvious reasons. Now, the very first game, which is going to be tomorrow's game or tonight's game, depending on when this comes out, is going to be the Buffalo Bills versus the New England Patriots. Now, the New England Patriots sit at 6-5 and are at the 8th seed, 1 seed above the Chargers, and the Bills are sitting at the 5th seed in the wildcard spot, as we just covered. Now, you might be saying a loss here by the Bills could be a good thing. It could, because it would drop the Bills to an 8-4 record, and will put it in a shot where the Chargers potentially could overtake the Bills. But I think the better option here is to root for the Bills against the Patriots. Patriots sit at 6-5. A loss here would put the Patriots at 6-6. Likely, if the Chargers can win this game, they'd jump them, or they'd stay at about the same. That is best case scenario. I think you root for the Patriots here because I think no matter what happens in this game, even if the Bills were to lose, I think the Bills are still going to end up as a higher seed than the Chargers. So it's better to root for a team that the Chargers are right beside than a team that's likely going to remain above the Chargers. So in this scenario, tomorrow night's game, best case scenario, you want to be rooting for the Bills to beat the Patriots. Score obviously doesn't matter for any of these things, but in this scenario, you want to be rooting Bills over Patriots. Now, for the noon games, we're going to be, starting from the very top. There's a ton of noon o'clock games. First things first, Packers versus Bears. Relatively no meaning for the Chargers in either of these outcomes because you're not going to be seeing either of these guys, and they're both likely going to be, falling out of playoffs in general. Anyways, maybe you want to root for, whatever reason. You could root for Bears, you could root for Packers, completely up to you. Doesn't really matter who you root for in this scenario. The next game is going to be the Steelers versus the Falcons. Now, in this scenario, if it's AFC versus NFC, you almost always want to be rooting for the NFC team, like 99% of the time. Root for the NFC team because that means that someone in the AFC is going to be taking a loss. You want to see that. Steelers currently not in the top 10. I think they're at 4-7. Yes, 4-7. They're the 14th seed. But, if they find a way to get on a roll, a 9-7 record is going to be pretty close to at least in the race for the wild card. And depending on how things shake out, that could be enough to overtake the Chargers. I don't see that happening. I think Chargers need to win at least 10 games to make it in the playoffs. But still, nonetheless, you want to be rooting for the Falcons in this scenario over the Steelers. Really push Steelers out of contention for a playoff spot. Next game, you're having Jets versus Vikings. Clearly want to be rooting for the Vikings right here. Not only have they been doing really, really good on the year, currently sitting with a 9-2 record going up against the Jets, who are obviously that final seed in the wild card at 7-4. You could drop them down to 7-5. Chargers could match that with a win this week. Not sure who would hold the spot if they had the same record. Who would, be that 7th seed? Not quite sure. But you're going to want to root for the Jets here. And I think it's quite possible. You have Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, obviously Adam Thielen, TJ Hawkinson, Dalvin Cook, and a really, really potent offense for that Vikings team. I could definitely see them taking down a Jets team, especially a team that doesn't seem to know what they're doing with quarterback position. You want to be rooting for the Vikings over the Jets. I think that's a likely outcome. I would say Bills over Patriots is a likely outcome, but I do believe the Bills are 0-3 this year, and I think Falcons over Steelers is the likely outcome. So far for Chargers, it's looking like a good thing this week. Next game we want to talk about here is going to be Lions versus Jaguars. In this scenario, obviously NFC versus AFC, you're going to be wanting to root for the Lions. I think Jaguars are 4-7, similar to the Steelers. It's not likely for them to be able to make it in and make a run here, but nonetheless, you want to see them take a loss. And it's honestly kind of fun to root for the Lions. Fun coach Dan Campbell, Jared Goff kind of back on the high rise after falling away from the Rams. Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Swift. The Lions are a fun team to watch, so I'm completely okay with rooting for the Lions, especially if it means an AFC team's loss. Next game here, Titans versus Eagles. In this scenario, with the Titans currently sitting with the 3 seed in the AFC East with a 7-4 record, a win or a loss here relatively doesn't matter because the fact that they're going to be that number 1 seed. But I think in this scenario, there's 2 ways to look at it. Against the Eagles, which by the way are a really, really good team. But I'm not going to say the Titans couldn't win this game. Especially, revenge game for A.J. Brown as well as Titans wanting to beat the Eagles just in general because they want to win. This game right here, you could root both ways. Maybe you root for the Titans to win here so that they can get on a roll, lock down the AFC South, and then they're going to rest their players. So when the Chargers go against them later in the year, maybe they don't have to verse the starters. That's a fair way to look at it. But the way I'm going to look at it here is, Eagles on the other side of things, and Eagles win here puts the Titans in this area where they aren't as good entering the playoffs, record-wise, which I think can be an important thing. Player-wise, they're going to be the same. But record-wise, a team that looks a little worse maybe won't be so high in themselves if somehow the Chargers go against them in the wildcard spot or in any point. The record could you know, seeing a slightly worse record could make you feel a little bit better entering that game. I'm honestly, like I said, most of the time you want to root for the NFC team. I'm going to say in this scenario, Chargers this week face Raiders. Then you have Dolphins. I think right after that is the Titans game. I want to say Titans is week 15. Does that sound right? Titans is week 15. So if the Titans win this and they win next week, they would move on to a 9-4 record. The closest AFC South team is a 4-7. Say the Colts drop both of their next coming games, they'd move to 4-9 with the Titans at 9-4. That's practically a lock, but I don't think it's enough to start resting players that early. I mean, you're in week 15, you still have 3 more games. I don't think you're resting anyone that early. So I will say in this scenario, doesn't matter a ton, but maybe take the Eagles on this one. I think it's fairly likely, but you can take the Eagles on this one so the Titans have a slightly worse record if you face them later on. In the regular season, obviously, you can face them, or in the playoffs, maybe lose a little confidence from the Titans as well as gain some confidence for the Chargers if they were to face them in the playoffs as well. This scenario, root for the Eagles, rooting for the Titans, not too big of a deal either. Next game, Browns versus Texans. Both these guys are pretty far out of contention, playoff contention, that is. But I'm going to say root for Texans in this scenario. I want to say the Browns are 4-7, and they're getting Deshaun Watson back. The remainder this week, they get Deshaun Watson back this week. The remainder of their schedule is honestly pretty light, and potentially they could go on a run here if Deshaun Watson knocks off his arrest fairly early. So you're going to want to root for the Texans here just to really push down the Browns and make sure they can't make a run. Because if they're at 4-8 and they win out, it's not very likely for them to make the playoffs with that record of 9-8. But you could, if they win this game, they get a run, they could get to 10-7. You don't want to see that by any means. So a 9-8, you want to see them take a loss right here. Texans over Browns. Next game, Commanders-Giants. Really has no relevancy. Root for whoever you want. Broncos-Ravens is the very next one. Now, it may sound very enticing as a Chargers fan to see this Broncos team that has been struggling dramatically and just keep pounding them down. Currently, they are the worst team in the AFC. No, sorry, second to worst, Texans being the worst. They're 3-8. I would say, Chargers are going to face them again. If they lose, Chargers need to win that game. And in that scenario, they're already out of playoffs. If they lose one more time, they're out of playoffs. And the Ravens currently sit at the 4th seed in the NFC North. And they're 7-4. The Bengals are also 7-4. I'm going to say, because of the fact that the Bengals can win this division or the Ravens can win this division, so you want to root against both to lose more games. That way, whichever one ends in the wild card will be worse off record-wise for it. I'm going to say you're going to want to root for the Broncos, and I don't like saying that, especially because it's fun watching them fail. But a Broncos win here would be good. Push the Ravens to 7-5. Would have the same record as the Chargers. If the Chargers are to win, that's obviously what we're rooting for most by any means. That wouldn't have the same record as the Chargers if they win and the Ravens lose. So root for the Broncos here. Don't root for the Broncos to have a really good game, but root for them to just barely win. Not a huge fan of saying that, but a Ravens loss here would be dramatic. Dolphins, 49ers is the next game. You're clearly going to be rooting for the 49ers here. 49ers, looking pretty solid in the year. They're a 3 seed. They're 7-4. You're going against the Dolphins, who the Chargers are going to have to face next week, with this week being the Raiders, next week being the Dolphins. Now, Dolphins are 8-3. If they were to move to 8-4, they would potentially have the same record, or I guess we root for the Bills over the Patriots, so they would drop down to the wild card spot, and the Chargers could, potentially beat them and overtake the Dolphins next week if all things were to play out right. I'm going to say root for the Dolphins, but don't root for a blowout, because a blowout could mean that the players are going to be really upset about that blowout and take revenge on the Chargers. I'm going to say root for the 49ers on a decent win, nothing too close, nothing too big. Root for the 49ers in this scenario. Seahawks, Rams. In this scenario, you would assume it wouldn't matter, but I'm going to say you're going to root for the Seahawks. That way the Rams are in worse position record-wise. and it's likely the Seahawks will win this anyways. You're going to root for the Seahawks here, so the Rams have a worse record when they face the Chargers. Potentially means that maybe the players aren't going to try as hard. I think that's a likely outcome there. Dolphins, 49ers, I think that could go both ways, but like I said, root for the 49ers. Broncos over Ravens, just running back through things, telling you how potentially, confident I am in the answer. I don't think the Broncos win that, but it would be good to see there. The next game is the Chargers game, Chargers versus Raiders. It's the most important game of this entire week is the Chargers winning this game. How likely is it? I'd like to say very likely, but I feel like it's going to be a tight game nonetheless. I'll have my video out on that on Friday, most likely, of the key matchups, key things for this week's game. Chargers versus Raiders, you're clearly rooting for the Chargers here. You'd love to see a blowout, love to see the offense start to get moving. If they win this, they move to 7-5, which could pretty much, depending on how some games turn out, likely if they move to 7-5, would jump to at least the 7th seed, potentially the 6th seed, depending on how some things are to rock out. Chargers there, really got to root for them. That's the most important game by far. Next game, Chiefs versus Bengals. Similar to the Broncos game, you normally don't want to root for an AFC West team to win a game, but in the scenario, the Chargers pretty much have a 0% chance of winning the division, and the Bengals are sitting at that 6th seed at 7-4. You're going to be rooting for the Chiefs here to beat the Bengals. That would drop the Bengals to 7-5. That would match them with the Ravens, because we're rooting for Broncos there. I don't think that one's actually going to happen, but that's who you want to root for, Broncos over Ravens. But in this scenario, you want to be rooting Chiefs over Bengals, hopefully drop the Bengals to a 7-5 record. Chargers can hopefully match that, and as the year progresses, Bengals have a lot tougher schedule, so maybe the Chargers could overtake them through the remainder of the year. Cowboys, Colts, you're going to be rooting for the Cowboys here, as much as I hate to say that because it's fun to root against Cowboys. But you do want to see, not only because the Chargers are going to face the Colts later in the year, you want them in a worse record so they're not trying so hard, because that is the thing that happens in the league. When you're in a bad position, your team's record is way below and you're out of playoffs, you're not going to try as hard because you want to prevent injuries so you can get your contract. But you're going to be rooting for the Cowboys here, push the Colts' record down, push them out of contention, put the Chargers in a better spot when they're going to face them later in the year in I want to say that's going to be week 16 that you face the Colts, and then 17 is I'm blanking. 17's Rams, 18's Broncos. So yeah, root for the Cowboys over the Colts right there. I think that's the likely outcome. Saints, Buccaneers, that one doesn't matter at all. Just for fun, if you want to root for the Saints, feel free. But yeah, we've ran through all the games. We ran through where the Chargers currently sit, who to root for, who to root against, all these scenarios. Obviously, the most important game is going to be the Chargers, but you would love to see a Bengals loss and a Jets loss and a Patriots loss. I think those are the three that are the most likely, with the, Vikings versus Jets. Likely Jets could lose that. Chiefs versus Bengals. Likely Bengals could lose that. And Bills versus Patriots. It's likely that the Patriots could lose that. Those are three games, so you want to be rooting against them and are the most likely and would allow the Chargers to jump the highest potentially. I mean, you could launch the Chargers. I'm not exactly sure how things stack up, who has the tiebreaker in this scenario, but that could launch the Chargers all the way to the 6th seed potentially with those three teams losing, and put the Chargers in a really good position with all three of those teams having a much more difficult layout for the rest of the year. So those are the teams that you guys want to be rooting for. Now, obviously, Chargers game is the most important by far, and there's a lot left of the season, but what do you guys think? What teams are you going to be rooting for, whether that is, for the teams I suggested, or if you do have other opinions, feel free to leave those down in the comments. Have a conversation with me about the Chargers. What do you think? Like I said, Friday's video will be the Chargers versus Raiders, some of the key things, but what are your thoughts on this week's game against the Raiders? How do you think that's going to turn out? And as always, if you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. I hope to have some today. Hope it made you smile, made you laugh. Something's really important to me. Affects me most day in a great way, because every single day can be a great day if you all just put in the effort. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.